Here we're looking at what stimulation of the vagus nerve will do specifically to heart rate in this activity. But I also ask you about the force of contraction so that we keep in mind the parasympathetic influence over the heart in general, right? And so PhysioX reviews the fact that the SA node is the set of pacemaker cells. They have the fastest rate of spontaneous depolarization. They have the steepest pre-potentials, the steepest slope for their pre-potentials. They rise to the threshold the fastest to generate action potentials. Without any type of external stimulation, input from the parasympathetic division, sympathetic division, the SA nodal cells generate action potentials, about 100 action potentials per minute. And then we add normal parasympathetic influence, vagal influence, if you will, with the vagus nerve. And we ask, how is that going to influence heart rate? And that's what you were doing here. You were just stimulating the vagus nerve to see what kind of effect that had on heart rate. And what effect did you see? Did you see heart rate increase or decrease? When you stimulated the parasympathetic nerve.
Decrease.
Decrease, right? Technically, you didn't even have to do this, and you should still be able to predict what that would be. The effect on the heart for parasympathetic influence would be decreased heart rate. And what do we know about parasympathetic influence over contractility, over inotropy?
It doesn't really have a effect.
Exactly. There's no real effect. So if we had to think about just the basic influence here, we'd say that negative effect on chronotropy, here we go, and no effect on inotropy. Because we don't see that the ventricles for most people are innervated by the parasympathetic division. The concept of vagal escape is described here in this section, in this activity, but you don't actually do anything in the manipulation regarding vagal escape. It's just mentioned here. And that's just a useful concept to note. We talked about briefly when we were working with the heart cells, the specialized cells and the contractile cells, when we were discussing how the parasympathetic and sympathetic division influences those SA nodal and AV nodal cells. And what I just want you to keep in mind about vagal escape is it's describing the ability of either the sympathetic reflexes, the sympathetic division, or the spontaneous depolarization by the Purkinje fibers, for instance, to resume heartbeat at the ventricles, at the level of ventricles, because there's no parasympathetic influence here. And this would occur if vagal stimulation at the AV node has caused heartbeat to slow to a stop. You can ask, well, when would that occur? Whenever we have continuous or excessive vagal stimulation and continuous or excessive parasympathetic input at the AV node in particular, could cause heart rate to stop. That's just a basic example here. If you use carotid massage, which means you're just pushing on the carotid artery. I'm not going to do it right now. That wouldn't be a good idea. But applying pressure to the carotid artery where you have the baroreceptors that sense stretch, that sense pressure. Now you're increasing the pressure there. Those baroreceptors are interpreting that as an increase in blood pressure. And as part of the baroreceptor reflex arc, they're now generating many more action potentials, sending those to the cardioregulatory center and the vasomotor center. And what does the MO do at this point? The medulla oblongata shuts down sympathetic activity, upregulates parasympathetic activity. And if that's a very big stimulus, right, you're applying a lot of pressure there, a very big parasympathetic response, and you're taking away that sympathetic influence. You get a massive decrease in heart rate, removing the sympathetic influence, decrease in contractility, cardiac output is definitely going to go down, not to mention the fact that you are decreasing sympathetic response for the vasomotor center. You're going to get more vasodilation. and blood pressure drops precipitously very quickly, and you lose consciousness if you apply pressure at that location for too long. So that would be an example of continuous or excessive vagal stimulation. There are other ways that could happen. Various types of drugs can have this effect on the parasympathetic input or directly at the AV node, stimulating the heart in the way the parasympathetic division would and decreasing heart rate to a stop. Vagal escape, like I said, describes the ability of the sympathetic division as well as the Purkinje fibers to take over, try to escape that control that the vagal nerve, the parasympathetic division, has now over the heart. And so if blood pressure greatly drops because the heartbeat has stopped due to that excessive vagal input, then that drop in blood pressure should then trigger, hopefully, the baroreceptor reflex arc to increase sympathetic response once again. And if something's wrong where the parasympathetic input is still happening at the AV node despite upregulating sympathetic response, then we can escape that parasympathetic response with sympathetic input on the ventricles directly, right? Because the ventricles are only innervated, for most people, by the sympathetic division. And so direct input there can resume heart rate. Or given enough time, some of those latent pacemakers, they're associated with the Purkinje fibers, they're going to rise to threshold and they can stimulate a heart rate within the ventricles. Of course, under those conditions, heart rate is going to be very slow, given the slow rate of depolarization for the Purkinje fibers. But still, some heartbeat is better than no heartbeat for this vagal escape.